repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. It's the 31st of October 2015. This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. I'm your host, Walter, and if you go to UCY.tv, you can find the chat link over there. There's a couple of people already there. Good morning, 8Hawk, Scap, Dan, Earth Defensive Force. Alright, never seen that one before. Hello? Ganja. That sounds like somebody familiar. I am Lone Frog, JJ, Otto, and Vince. Welcome, everybody. How have you been? You got a cup of coffee, like I do? So, this morning we're going to discuss philosophy. I guess it falls under. What is the Socratic method? Is what we're going to be reading from here today. The Socratic method is a way to seek truths by your own lights. It is a system, a spirit, a method, a type of philosophical inquiry, an intellectual technique, all rolled into one. Socrates himself never spelled out a method. However, the Socratic method is named after him because Socrates, more than any other before or since, models for us philosophy practiced. Philosophy as deed, as a way of living, as something that any of us can do. It is an open system of philosophical inquiry that allows one to interrogate from many vantage points. There. Missed out on the chats. I scrolled up and it didn't scroll down. There we go. Okay, there's action in the chat. Very good. So that was the first paragraph. Next, Gregory Vlastos, Socrates scholar and professor of philosophy at Princeton, described Socrates' method of inquiry as among the greatest achievements of humanity. Why? Because he says it makes philosophical inquiry a common human enterprise open to every man. Instead of requiring allegiance to a specific philosophical viewpoint or analytic technique or specialized vocabulary, the Socratic method calls for common sense and common speech. And this, he says, is as it should be for how man should live is every man's business. I think, however, that the Socratic method goes beyond Vlastos's description. It does not merely call for common sense, but examines what common sense is. The Socratic method asks, does the common sense of our day offer us the greatest potential for self-understanding and human excellence? Or is the prevailing common sense, in fact, a roadblock to realizing this potential? Vlastos goes on to say that Socratic inquiry is by no means simple and calls not only for the highest degree of mental alertness of which anyone is capable, but also for moral qualities of a high order, sincerity, humility, courage. Such qualities protect against the possibility that Socratic dialogue, no matter how rigorous, would merely grind out wild conclusions with irresponsible premises. I agree, though I would replace the quality of sincerity with honesty, since one can hold a conviction sincerely without examining it. While honesty would require that one subject one's convictions to frequent scrutiny. All right. A Socratic dialogue reveals how different our outlooks can be on concepts we use every day. It reveals how different our philosophies are, and often how tenable or untenable, as the case may be, a range of philosophies can be. Moreover, even the most universally recognized and used concept, when subjected to Socratic scrutiny, might reveal not only that there is not universal agreement after all on the meaning of any given concept, but that every single person has a somewhat different take on each and every concept under the sun. What's more, there seems to be no such thing as a concept so abstract or a question so off base that it can't be fruitfully explored at Socrates' cafe. In the course of Socratizing, it often turns out to be the case that some of the most so-called abstract concepts are intimately related to the most profoundly relevant human experiences. In fact, it's been my experience that virtually any question can be plumbed Socratically. Sometimes you don't know what question will have the most lasting and significant impact until you take a risk and delve into it for a while. What distinguishes the Socratic method from mere non-systematic inquiry is the sustained attempt to explore the ramifications of certain opinions and then offer compelling objections and alternatives. This scrupulous and exhaustive form of inquiry in many ways resembles the scientific method. But unlike Socratic inquiry, scientific inquiry would often lead us to believe that whatever is not measurable cannot be investigated. This belief fails to address such paramount human concerns as sorrow and joy and suffering and love. Instead of focusing on the outer cosmos, Socrates focused primarily on human beings and their cosmos within, utilizing his method to open up new realms of self-knowledge, while at the same time exposing a great deal of error, superstition, and dogmatic nonsense. The Spanish-born American philosopher and poet George Santayana said that Socrates knew that the foreground of human life is necessarily moral and practical, and that it is so even for artists and even for scientists, try as some might to divorce their work from these dimensions of human existence. Scholars call Socrates' method the Elenchus. No, don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's Hellenistic Greek for inquiry or cross-examination. But it is not just any type of inquiry or examination. It's a type that reveals people to themselves, that makes them see what their opinions really amount to. C.D.C. Reeve, professor of philosophy at Reed College, gives the standard explanation of an Elenchus in saying that its aim is not simply to reach adequate definitions of such things as virtues, rather it also has a moral reformatory purpose. For Socrates believes that regular elenctic philosophizing makes people happier and more virtuous than anything else. Indeed, philosophizing is so important for human welfare on his view that he is willing to accept execution rather than give it up. Socrates' method of examination can indeed be a vital part of existence, but I would not go so far as to say that it should be. And I do not think that Socrates felt that habitual use of this method makes people happier. The fulfillment that comes from Socratizing comes only at a price. It could well make us unhappier, more uncertain, more troubled, as well as more fulfilled. It can leave us with a sense that we don't know the answer after all, that we are much further from knowing the answer than we'd ever realize before engaging in Socratic discourse. And this is fulfilling, and exhilarating and humbling and perplexing. We may leave a Socrates cafe. In all likelihood, we will leave a Socrates cafe with a heady, it's supposed to be heavy, I guess, with a heavy sense that there are many more ways and truths and lights by which to examine any given concept that we had ever before imagined. There's a book by Friedrich Nietzsche, apparently. Friedrich Nietzsche. The Gay Science. He said, I admire the courage and wisdom of Socrates in all he did, said, and did not say. Nietzsche was a distinguished 19th century classical philologist before he abandoned the academic fold and became known for championing a type of heroic individual who would create a life-affirming, will-to-power ethic. In the spirit of his writings on such individuals, whom he described as Superman, Nietzsche lauded Socrates as a genius of the heart, whose voice knows how to descend into the depth of every soul, who teaches one to listen, who smooths rough souls and lets them taste a new yearning, who divines the hidden and forgotten treasure, the drop of goodness. From from whose touch everyone goes away richer, not having found grace nor amazed, not as blessed and oppressed by the good of another, but richer in himself, opened, less sure perhaps, but full of hopes that as yet have no name. I only differ with Nietzsche when he characterizes Socrates as someone who descended into the depths of others' souls. To the contrary, Socrates enabled those with whom he engaged in dialogues to descend into the depth of their own souls and create their own life, affirming ethic. Santayana said that he would never hold views in philosophy which he did not believe in daily life, and that he would deem it dishonest and even spineless to advance or entertain views in discourse which were not those under which he habitually lived. But there is no need divide between one's views of philosophy and of life. They are overlapping and kindred views. It is virtually impossible in many instances to know what we believe in daily life until we engage others in dialogue. Likewise, to discover our philosophical views, we must engage with ourselves, with the lives we already lead. Our views form, change, evolve as we participate in this dialogue. It is the only way truly to discover what philosophical colors we sail under. Everyone at some point preaches to himself and others what he does not yet practice. Everyone acts in or on the world in ways that are in some way contradictory or inconsistent with the views he or she confesses or professes to hold. For instance, the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, the influential founder of existentialism, put Socratic principles to use in writing his dissertation on the concept of irony in Socrates, often using pseudonyms so he could argue his own position with himself. In addition, the 16th century essayist Michel de Montaigne, who was called the French Socrates and was known as the father of skepticism in modern Europe, would write and add conflicting and even contradictory passages in the same work. Excuse me. And like Socrates, he believed the search for truth was worth dying for. The Socratic method forces people to confront their own dogmatism, according to Leonard Nelson, a German philosopher who wrote on such subjects as ethics and theory of knowledge. Epistemology is theory of knowledge. Until he was forced by the rise of Nazism to quit. By doing so, participants in Socratic dialogue are, in effect, forcing themselves to be free, Nelson maintains. But they're not just confronted with their own dogmatisms. In the course of a Socrates cafe, they may be confronted with an array of hypotheses, convictions, conjectures, and theories offered by other participants, and themselves, all of which subscribe to some sort of dogma. The Socratic method requires that, honestly and openly, rationally and imaginatively, they confront the dogma by asking such questions as, what does this mean? What speaks for and against it? Are there alternative ways of considering it that are even more plausible and tenable? At certain junctures of a Socratic dialogue, the forcing that this confrontation entails, the insistence that each participant carefully articulate her singular philosophical perspective, can be upsetting. But that is all to the good. If it never touches any nerves, if it doesn't upset, if it doesn't mentally and spiritually challenge and perplex in a wonderful and exhilarating way, it is not Socratic dialogue. This forcing opens us up to the varieties of experiences of others, whether through direct dialogue or through other means, like drama or books, or through a work of art or a dance. It compels us to explore alternative perspectives, asking what might be said for or against each. Keep this ethos in mind if you ever, for instance, feel tempted to ask a question like this one once posed at a Socrates cafe. How can we overcome alienation? Challenge the premise of the question at the outset. You may need to ask, is alienation something we always want to overcome? For instance, Shakespeare and Goethe may have written their timeless works because they embraced their sense of alienation rather than attempting to escape it. If this was so, then you might want to ask, are there many different types and degrees of alienation? Depending on the context, are there some types that you want to overcome and other types that you do not at all want to overcome, but rather want to incorporate into yourself? And to answer effectively such questions, you first need to ask and answer such questions as, what is alienation? What does it mean to overcome alienation? Why would we ever want to overcome alienation? What are some types and the many different types of alienation? What are the criteria or traits that link each of these types? Is it possible to be completely alienated? And many more questions besides. Those who become smitten with the Socratic method of philosophical inquiry thrive on the question. They never run out of questions or out of new ways to question. Some of Socrates' cafes' most avid philosophers are, for me, the question personified. That was it. I thought this was longer. Alright. No problem. There's lots of other stuff we can do. This is one interesting one. I don't know if we should actually read this, but it's The Last Will and Testament of Cecil John Rhodes, with elucidatory notes to which are added some chapters describing the political and religious ideas of the testator, Cecil Rhodes. So that could be interesting. Something that's been bugging me, or, well, I shouldn't say bugging me, something that has been drawing my attention as a philosopher, so to speak, is this idea that I came across. I forget his name. If I remember, I will mention. Mark Passio. And he was talking about right and wrong. And the claim is that it's based in natural law. And when you look up natural law in Wikipedia, historically natural law refers to the use of reason to analyze both social and personal human nature, to deduce binding rules of moral behavior. All right, so let me read that again. Historically, natural law refers to the use of reason to analyze both social and personal human nature, to deduce binding rules of moral behavior. All right, so I thought natural law, and I really don't know too much about it. And I should probably, Mark Passio has also I believe a 5 or 6 hour lesson on it, which I haven't watched yet. So I will do that as my homework. But I thought that natural law was like universal, right? It's something that goes all over the universe, not just here on Earth. And that's also what it says here at Wikipedia. That the only difference is that they turn things around. It's when I look it up at natural law, you get the law of nature being determined by nature is universal, right? So now that helps to understand more about natural law, right? It is determined by nature. So, that would mean that that's where humans should get their standard from. Deciding whether a thing is moral or not, whether a thing is right or wrong. Now, Mark Passio also explains that if you violate somebody else's rights, then that's wrong. If you are violent in any way, then you're wrong, right? It's within these laws that are determined by nature, there is the non-aggression principle, right? Okay, so far so good. I mean, I have no objections so far. Yeah. But then nature then decides as to what is right and wrong. However, there are other philosophies out there like objectivism and many others that use this system of philosophy that goes like this. You start with ontology or metaphysics or what's the nature of reality. That's what you start with. And then the aforementioned epistemology, how do you know that is what it is? The theory of knowledge. And based on those two, you derive morality, which is the third leg, so to speak, of philosophical system. There are more. There are 5, like, as objectivism was explained to me anyway. There are 2 more. Moral, there drives to ethics, right? And so you get polyethics, which is politics, as a 4th, and aesthetics as a 5th. And, you know, there's probably many more subdivisions. But that's how you would arrive at deciding what is right and wrong, right? Via your morals, which depend on your metaphysics. So if somebody believes that quote-unquote God exists or whatever, who would have totally different morals than some atheist, for instance, or even a Buddhist, who have a very violent philosophy, as far as I'm concerned. It has to do with the karma idea. That's another thing that comes back in this natural law thing, I think, is cause and effect, right? That's also something that comes back in philosophy. And, you know, there's a difference between cause and effect and karma, right? Karma is this fantasy idea that bad things will happen if you do bad things. Yeah, that bad things will happen to you. Yeah, I guess that's why all the bad people are in power, right? Nothing bad ever happens to these people, and if it does, like they get cancer or whatever, they have their very sophisticated secret medical solutions for that. They won't share that with the public, you know. So there's like that's been drawing my attention and been bugging me a little bit as to where do I stand as to where do I myself stand as to what's right and wrong. I remember myself talking about this like maybe 8 years ago, something like that. And I said then, not knowing what I know now, but I guess I'm still, I don't think it's wrong. But then I said, your morality comes from within, comes from yourself, comes from your heart. That's where it is, right? And I still believe that, right? I can't derive my morals from my metaphysics and epistemology yet, because I still haven't figured out what grammar to put in the metaphysics branch. Now there are some things there that maybe I should say I took from objectivism, but also when I did do a little research into it, I haven't finished by a long run, but when I did do a little research in this objectivism, I found that, but that's what I always thought. This is how I always think. So some, ways of thinking were already in me about objectivism. That there is a reality out there. I always found those people, and there have been many that come to me and said, "Did you know everything is an illusion?" You know how many times I've had to endure that? Many, many, many times. And I always felt that there was something wrong with that. Yeah. How can you make that claim, So, yeah. It's a difficult subject. All right, so that's what we can do. We can dive a little bit deeper via wiki into this natural law thing. Or, and I don't think we're going to do this, but last week we did this principles of general grammar, remember? Did any of you even understand like one paragraph? Because I sure didn't. Yeah, this was too difficult. So, if you did understand, start up your Skype and text me, Solvinur, at Skype, that, yeah, I understand, and I can explain on air. I'll get you on the air and you can tell us a little bit about it, because it was too difficult for me. And that was taught to children, right? Unbelievable. Yeah. And what else do we have? See, we have this one. What is logic? We can do that. It's pretty difficult. Here's another one. I think we've done this one before, but I think it's okay to repeat this once. Because I think we've only done this once. It's also a discussion on logic. All right. Those are the things that I have open at the moment. Which one should we do? Let's see, I've got many more things open here, but that's not radio, not meant for radio. Like, I have this one open, Believers Beware. It's a movie by Paul Verge, and it features many people, among which I see James... I'm not sure if James Corbett was in there, but Lisa Arbicheski, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your last name, is in there from Tragedy and Hope, as well as Richard, also in there. And Jan Irvin is also in there. A lot of people talking about different things. I'm at part 3 now. It's in 17 parts. I couldn't find the full one. So that's if you haven't seen that yet, go look at it. Believers Beware is the title. So let's see. Is the chat. Anybody? Dan has joined us. Hey Dan, how you doing? Road Dog is also here. Hey buddy. And I guess that's it. For new people, welcome. One and on also. Let's see. The 6 thinking hats is also something we could do. Discuss a little bit about it. Won't take long. It entails a different way of addressing problems, like at meetings and things like that. But I suppose it's also usable solo. I think so. Would have heard about it this far, which was one episode of Peace Revolution. If you haven't never heard of Peace Revolution, go check it out, peacerevolution.org. Pretty interesting stuff. What's up, Dan? What are you guys talking about in the chat room? So what do you want to hear about what I just, all of those things I just mentioned? What do you guys want to hear? Do thinking heads cause colossus? What the heck is colossus? Oh my god, my English is not so good. Copy that. Is that even a word? I've never heard of it. It's a word. It's a word. No. Callous. I see. Calusus. Show for calluses. Google changes the word. Callus, a thickened and hardened part of the skin or soft tissue. Strange. How is the weather in the Netherlands, says Dan. It's been sunny and the leaves have dropped from some of the trees totally. And it's getting colder. But we had some sun. And I think tomorrow is also going to be sunny. Well, if there's no persistent contrails blocking the sun, that is. Alright, so are we going to do the logic thing then? This is pretty difficult stuff. It's pretty difficult. Oh, blah blah blah. Back to the chat on this tab. Drag it a bit down. What is logic? Is the one we're going to take. Yeah. What is logic? Logic may be defined as the science of reasoning. However, this is not to suggest that logic is an empirical, i.e. experimental or observational science, like physics, biology, or psychology. Rather, logic is a non-empirical science like mathematics. Also, in saying that logic is the science of reasoning, we do not mean that it is concerned with the actual mental or physical process employed by a thinking being when it is reasoning. Yeah. The investigation of the actual reasoning process falls more appropriately within the province of psychology, neurophysiology, or cybernetics. Even if these empirical disciplines were considerably more advanced than they presently are, the most they could disclose is the exact process that goes on in a being's head when he or she or it is reasoning. This could not, however, tell us whether the being is reasoning correctly or incorrectly. Distinguishing correct reasoning from incorrect reasoning is the task of logic. Alright, I hope we're going to get through this. Without causing any major accidents. 2. Inferences and arguments. Reasoning is a special mental activity called inferring, what can also be called making or performing inferences. The following is a useful and simple definition of the word infer. To infer is to draw conclusions from premises. In place of the word premises, you can also put data, information, facts. Examples of inferences. 1. You see smoke and infer that there is a fire. 2. You count 19 persons in a group that originally had 20 and you infer that someone is missing. Note carefully the difference between infer and imply. Note carefully the difference between infer and imply, which are sometimes confused. We infer the fire on the basis of the smoke, but we do not imply the fire. On the other hand, the smoke implies the fire, but it does not infer the fire. The word infer is not equivalent to the word imply, nor is it equivalent to insinuate. The reasoning process may be thought of as beginning with input, premises, data, etc., and producing output, conclusions. Alright, so most of you should be going, hey, that's grammar and rhetoric. In each specific case of drawing, inference, a conclusion, see from premises P1, P2, P3. The details of the actual mental process, how the gears work, is not the proper concerns of logic, but of psychology and neurophysiology. The proper concern of logic is whether the inference of C on the basis of P1, P2, P3 is warranted or correct. Inferences are made on the basis of various sorts of things: data, facts, information, states of affairs. In order to simplify the investigation of reasoning, logic treats all of these in terms of a single sort of thing: statements. Logic correspondingly treats inferences in terms of collections of statements, which are called arguments. The word argument has a number of meanings in ordinary English. The definition of argument that is relevant to logic is given as follows. An argument is a collection of statements, one of which is designed as the conclusion, and the remainder of which are designed as the premises. Note that this is not a definition of a good argument. Also note that, of a good argument, I should say. Also note that in the context of ordinary discourse, an argument has an additional trait described as follows. Usually, the premises of an argument are intended to support or justify the conclusion of the argument. Before giving some concrete examples of arguments, it might be best to clarify a term in the definition. The word statement is intended to mean declarative sentence. In addition to declarative sentences, there are also interrogative, imperative, and exclamatory sentences. The sentences that make up an argument are all declarative sentences, that is, they are all statements. The following may be taken as the official definition of statement. A statement is a declarative sentence, which is to say a sentence that is capable of being true or false. The following are examples of statements. It is raining. I am hungry. 2 and 2 equals 4. God exists. On the other hand, the following are examples of sentences that are not statements. Are you hungry? Shut the door, please. And then, these... I'll type it in. I'll put it in the chat room. It's usually used exclamatory. Observe that whereas a statement is capable of being true or false, a question or a command or an exclamation is not capable of being true or false. Note that in saying that a statement is capable of being true or false, we are not saying that we know for sure which of the two, true or false, it is. Thus, for a sentence to be a statement, it is not necessary that humankind knows for sure whether it is true or whether it is false. An example is the statement, God exists. Now let us go back to inferences and arguments. Earlier, we discussed 2 examples of inferences. Let us see how these can be represented as arguments. In the case of the smoke-fire inference, the corresponding argument is given as follows. A1. There is smoke. Lol. Lone frog. A1. There is smoke. This is the premise. Therefore, there is fire. This is the conclusion. Here the argument consists of 2 statements. There is smoke and there is fire. The term therefore is not strictly speaking part of the argument. It rather serves to designate the conclusion, there is fire, setting it apart from the premise. There is smoke. In this argument, there is just one premise. In the case of the missing person inference, the corresponding argument is given as follows. A2. There were 20 persons originally. It's a premise. There are 19 persons currently. Another premise. Therefore, someone is missing. It's a conclusion. Here the argument consists of 3 statements. There were 20 persons originally, there are 19 persons currently, and someone is missing. Once again, therefore, sets off the conclusion from the premises. In principle, any collection of statements can be treated as an argument simply by designating which statement in particular is the conclusion. However, not every collection of statements is intended to be an argument. We accordingly need criteria by which to distinguish arguments from other collections of statements. Excuse me. There are no hard and fast rules for telling when a collection of statements is intended to be an argument, but there are few rules of thumb. Often an argument can be identified as such because its conclusion is marked. We have already seen one conclusion marker, the word therefore. Besides therefore, there are other words that are commonly used to mark conclusions of arguments, including consequently, hence, thus, so, and ergo. Usually, such words indicate that what follows is the conclusion of an argument. Other times an argument can be identified as such because its premises are marked. Words that are used for this purpose include for, because, and since. For example, using the word for, the smoke-fire argument earlier can be rephrased as follows. There is a fire, for there is smoke. Note that in this one, the conclusion comes before the premise. Other times, neither the conclusion nor the premise of an argument are marked, so it is harder to tell that the collection of statements is intended to be an argument. A general rule of thumb applies in this case as well as in previous cases. In an argument, the premises are intended to support or justify the conclusion. To state things somewhat differently, when a person speaking or writing advances an argument, he or she expresses a statement he or she believes to be true, the conclusion, and cites other statements as a reason for believing that statement, the premises. All right. Next is deductive logic versus inductive logic. Let us go back to the two arguments from the previous section. A1, there is smoke, therefore there is fire. And A2, there were 20 people originally, there are 19 persons currently, therefore someone is missing. There is an important difference between these two inferences, which corresponds to a division of logic into two branches. On the one hand, we know that the existence of smoke does not guarantee the existence of fire, if it only makes the existence of fire likely or probable. Thus, although inferring fire on the basis of smoke is reasonable, it is nevertheless fallible, insofar as it is possible for there to be smoke without there being fire. We may be wrong in asserting that there is a fire. The investigation of inferences of this sort is traditionally called inductive logic. Inductive logic investigates the process of drawing probable, though fallible, conclusions from premises. Another way of stating this, inductive logic investigates arguments in which the truth of a premise of the premises makes likely the truth of the conclusion. Inductive logic is a very difficult and intricate subject, partly because the practitioners of this discipline are not in complete agreement concerning what constitutes correct inductive reasoning. Inductive logic is not the subject of this book. If you want to learn about inductive logic, it is probably best to take a course on probability and statistics. Inductive reasoning is often called statistical or probabilistic reasoning and forms the basis of experimental science. Inductive reasoning is important to science, but so is deductive reasoning, which is the subject of this book. Consider the argument about the missing persons above. In this argument, if the premises are in fact true, then the conclusion is certainly also true. Or, to state things in the subjunctive mood, or mode? I don't know. If the premises were true, then the conclusion would certainly also be true. Still another way of stating things, the truth of the premises necessitates the truth of the conclusion. The investigation of these sorts of arguments is called deductive logic. The following should be noted. Suppose that you have an argument and suppose that the truth of the premises necessitates the truth of the conclusion. Then it follows logically that the truth of the premises makes likely the truth of the conclusion. This is confusing. First they say necessitate and then they say makes likely. In other words, if an argument is judged to be deductively correct, then it is also judged to be inductively correct as well. The converse is not true. Not every inductively correct argument is also deductively correct. The smoke-fire argument is an example of inductively correct argument that is not deductively correct. For whereas the existence of smoke makes likely the existence of fire, it does not guarantee the existence of fire. In deductive logic, the task is to distinguish deductively correct arguments from deductively incorrect arguments. Nevertheless, we should keep in mind that, although an argument may be judged to be deductively incorrect, it may still be reasonable. That is, it may still be inductively correct. Some arguments are not inductively correct and therefore are not deductively correct either. They are just plain unreasonable. Suppose you flunk intro logic, and suppose that on the basis of this you conclude that it will be a breeze to get into law school. Under these circumstances, it seems that your reasoning is faulty. 4. Statement versus propositions. Henceforth, by logic I mean deductive logic. Logic investigates inferences in terms of the arguments that represent them. Recall that an argument is a collection of statements, declarative sentences, one of which is one of which is designated as the conclusion, and the remainder of which are designated as the premises. Also recall that usually in an argument the premises are offered to support or justify the conclusions. Statements and sentences in general are linguistic objects like words. They consist of strings, sequences of sounds, spoken language, and strings of symbols, written language. Statements must be carefully distinguished from propositions they express when they are uttered. Intuitively, statements stand in the same relation to propositions as nouns stand to the object they denote. Just as the word water denotes a substance that is liquid under normal circumstances, the sentence, statement, water is wet denotes the proposition that water is wet. Equivalently, the sentences denote the state of affairs, the wetness of water. The difference between the 5-letter word water in English and the liquid substance it denotes should be obvious enough, and no one is apt to confuse the word with the substance. Whereas water consists of letters, water consists of molecules. The distinction between a statement and the proposition it expresses is very much like the distinction between the word water and the substance water. There is another difference between statements and propositions. Whereas statements are always part of a particular language, propositions are not peculiar to any particular language in which they might be expressed. Thus, for example, the following are different statements in different languages, yet they all express the same proposition, namely the whiteness of snow. Snow is white, der Schnee ist weiß, la neige est blanche. In this case, quite clearly, different sentences may be used to express the same proposition. The opposite can also happen. The same sentence may be used in different contexts or under different circumstances to express different propositions, to denote different states of affairs. For example, the statement, "I am hungry," expresses a different proposition for each person who utters it. When I utter it, the proposition expressed pertains to my stomach. When you utter it, the proposition pertains to your stomach. When the president utters it, the proposition pertains to his or her stomach. Next is form versus content. Although propositions, or the meaning of statements, are always lurking behind the scenes, logic is primarily concerned with statements. The reason is that statements are in some sense easier to point at, easier to work with. For example, we can write a statement on the blackboard and examine it. By contrast, since they are essentially abstract in nature, propositions cannot be brought into the classroom or anywhere. Propositions are unwieldy and uncooperative. What is worse, no one quite knows exactly what they are. There is another important reason for concentrating on statements rather than propositions. Logic analyzes and classifies arguments according to their form, as opposed to their content. This distinction will be explained later. Whereas the form of a statement is fairly easily understood, the form of a proposition is not so easily understood. Whereas it is easy to say what a statement consists of, it is not so easy to say what a proposition consists of. A statement consists of words arranged in a particular order. Thus, the form of a statement may be analyzed in terms of the arrangements of its constituent words. To be more precise, a statement consists of terms, which include simple terms and compound terms. A simple term is just a single word together with a specific grammatic role, being a noun or being a verb, etc. A compound term is a string of words that act as a grammatical unit within statements. Examples of compound terms include noun phrases such as the President of the United States, and predicate phrases such as is a Democrat. For the purposes of logic, terms divide into two important categories: descriptive terms and logical terms. One must carefully note, however, that this distinction is not absolute. Rather, the distinction between descriptive and logical terms depends on the level or depth of logical analysis we are pursuing. Let us pursue an analogy for a moment. Recall first of all that the core meaning of the word analyze is to break down a complex whole into its constituent parts. In physics, matter can be broken down, analyzed at different levels. It can be analyzed into molecules, into atoms, into elementary particles, Still deeper levels of analysis are available. The basic idea in breaking down matter is that in order to go deeper and deeper, one needs ever-increasing amounts of energy, and one needs increasing sophistication. The same may be said about logic and the analysis of language. There are many levels at which we can analyze language, and the deeper levels require more logical sophistication than the shallower levels. They also require more energy on the part of the logician. In the present text, we consider 3 different levels of logical analysis. Each of these levels is given a name: syllogistic logic, sentential logic, and predicate logic. Whereas syllogistic logic and sentential logic represent relatively superficial levels of logical analysis, predicate logic represents a relatively deep level of analysis. Deeper levels of analysis are available. Each level of analysis, syllogistic logic, sentential logic, and predicate logic, has associated with it a special class of logical terms. In the case of syllogistic logic, the logical terms include only the following: all, some, no, not, and is, are. In the case of sentential logic, the logical terms include only sentential connectives: and, or, if then, only if. In the case of predicate logic, the logical terms include the logical terms of both syllogistic and sentential logic. As noted earlier, logical analysis and is supposed to be classified, I guess. As noted earlier, logic analyzes and classifies arguments according to their form. The logical form of an argument is a function of the forms of the individual statements that constitute the argument. The logical form of a statement, in turn, is a function of the arrangements of its terms, where the logical terms are regarded as more important than the descriptive terms. Whereas the logical terms have to do with the form of a statement, the descriptive terms have to do with its content. Note, however, that since the distinction between logical terms and descriptive terms is relative to the particular level of analysis we are pursuing, the notion of logical form is likewise relative in this way. In particular, for each of the different logics listed above, there is a corresponding notion of logical form. The distinction between form and content is difficult to understand in the abstract. It is best to consider some actual examples. In a later section, we examine this distinction in the context of syllogistic logic. As soon as we can get a clear idea about form and content, then we can discuss how to classify arguments into those that are deductively correct and those that are not deductively correct. Okay, let me roll a ciggy, guys. Next is preliminary definitions. In the present section, we examine some of the basic ideas in logic, which will be made considerably clearer in subsequent chapters. As we saw in the previous section, there is a distinction in logic between form and content. There is likewise a distinction in logic between arguments that are good in form and arguments that are good in content. The distinction is best understood by way of an example or two. Consider the following argument. A1. All cats are dogs. All dogs are reptiles. Therefore, all cats are reptiles. Alright, so there seems to be nothing wrong with the form, but content is not so good, right? A2. Vertebrates. I need to look that up, guys. I'm sorry. Live research on the air. Blah blah. Paste it in the Google. And what do we get? Come on. Definition. Vertebrate. A vertebrate is an animal that has a backbone and a skeleton. Okay? So, animal has a backbone and a skeleton. Okay. All cats are vertebrates. All mammals are vertebrates. Therefore, all cats are mammals. All C are V. All M are V. Therefore, all C are M. Doesn't sound well for some reason. Let's see what we get here. Neither of these arguments is good, but they are bad for different reasons. Consider first their content. Whereas all the statements in A1 are false, all of the statements in A2 are true. Since the premises of A1 are not all true, this is a good argument as far as contents go, whereas A2 is a good argument as far as content goes. So, I guess they messed up some things here. It says, since the premises of A1 are not all true, this is not a good argument as far as content goes. Alright, so that's good. Whereas A2, the cats and the vertebrates, is a good argument as far as content goes. Yeah, but not as form, right? Now consider their forms. This will be explained more fully in a later section. The question is this: do the premises support the conclusion? Does the conclusion follow from the premises? In the case of A1, the premises do in fact support the conclusion. The conclusion does in fact follow the premises. Although the premises are not true, if they were true, then the conclusion would also be true by necessity. In the case of 2, the premises are all true, and so is the conclusion. But nevertheless, the truth of the conclusion is not conclusively supported by the premises. In A2, the conclusion does not follow from the premises. To see that the conclusion does not follow from the premises, we need merely substitute the term reptiles for mammals. Then the premises are both true, but the conclusion is false. Alright. So here again the one that he's talking about. This is kind of confusing, right? It seems all true, but you cannot follow it from this kind of form. All cats are vertebrates, all mammals are vertebrates, therefore all cats are mammals. Right? There's something wrong with the form being used, I think. All of this is meant to be an intuitive level, at an intuitive level. The details will be presented later. For the moment, however, we give some rough definition to help us to get started in understanding the ways of classifying various arguments. In examining an argument, there are basically two questions one should ask. Are all of the premises true? Does the conclusion follow from the premises? The classification of a given argument is based on the answer to these two questions. In particular, we have the following definitions. An argument is factually correct if and only if all of its premises are true. An argument is valid if and only if its conclusion follows from its premises. An argument is sound if and only if it is both factually correct and valid. Basically, a factually correct argument has good content and a valid argument has good form. And a sound argument has both good content and good form. Note that a factually correct argument may have a false conclusion. The definition only refers to the premises. Whether an argument is valid is sometimes difficult to decide. Sometimes it is hard to know whether or not the conclusion follows from the premises. Part of the problem has to do with knowing what follows from means. In studying logic, we are attempting to understand the meaning of follows from. More importantly, perhaps, we are attempting to learn how to distinguish between valid and invalid arguments. Although logic can teach us something about validity and invalidity, it can teach us very little about factual correctness. The question of the truth or falsity of individual statements is primarily the subject matter of the sciences, broadly construed. As a rough and ready definition of validity, the following is offered. An argument is valid if and only if it is impossible for the conclusion to be false while the premises are all true. An alternative definition might be helpful in understanding validity. To say that an argument is valid is to say that if the premises were true, then the conclusion would necessarily also be true. These will become clearer as you read further and as you study particular examples. All right. So we come to the next part, 7. Form and content in syllogistic logic. In order to understand more fully the notion of logical form, we will briefly examine syllogistic logic. Syllogism, which was invented by Aristotle. The arguments studied in syllogistic logic are called syllogisms, more precisely categorical syllogisms. Syllogisms have a couple of distinguishing characteristics which make them peculiar as arguments. First of all, every syllogism has exactly two premises, whereas in general an argument can have any number of premises. Secondly, the statements that constitute a syllogisms, two premises and one conclusion, come in very few models, so to speak. More precisely, all such statements have forms similar to the following statements. 1. All Lutherans are Protestants. All dogs are collies. Some Lutherans are Republicans. I'm reading that wrong. All Lutherans are Protestants. Some Lutherans are Republicans. This sounds like something. A Protestant Republican, I guess. And then, so that's 1. All Lutherans are Protestants. 2. Some Lutherans are Republicans. 3. None of the Lutherans are Methodists. And 4. Some Lutherans are not Democrats. Alright. Sometimes I find it easier to just use the first letters of things. All L are P. Some L are R. No L are M. And some L are not D. Alright, so forms. Another, there's more about the dogs. All dogs are collies. Some dogs are cats. No dogs are pets. Some dogs are not mammals. Strange, right? In these examples, the words written in bold-face letters are descriptive terms, and the remaining words are logical terms, relative to syllogistic logic. Alright, so bold-face letters are the Lutherans, the Protestants, the Republicans, the Methodists, the Democrats, the mammals, the dogs, the pets, the collies. And the logical terms are all, some, no, and not, and are, or is. In syllogistic logic, the descriptive terms all refer to classes. For example, the classes of cats, or the class of mammals. On the other hand, in syllogistic logic, the logical terms are all used to express relations among classes. For example, the statement on line 1 states that a certain class, Lutherans, is entirely contained in another class, Protestants. Note the following about the 4 pairs of statements above. In each case, the pair contains both a true statement on the left and a false statement on the right. Also, in each case, the statements are about different things. Thus, we can say that the 2 statements differ in content. Note, however, that in each pair above, the 2 statements have the same form. Thus, although all Lutherans are Protestants, differs in content from all dogs are collies, these 2 statements have the same form. The sentences 1 to 4 are what we call concrete sentences. They are all actual sentences of a particular actual language. Concrete sentences are to be distinguished from sentence forms. Basically, a sentence form may be obtained from a concrete sentence by replacing all the descriptive terms by the letters, which serves as placeholders. For examples, sentences 1 to 4 yield the following sentence forms. All x are y, some x are y, no x are y, some x are not y. The process can also be reversed. Concrete sentences may be obtained from sentence forms by uniformly substituting descriptive terms for the letters. Any concrete sentence obtained from a sentence form in this way is called a substitution instance of that form. For example, all cows are mammals and all cats are felines are both substitution instances of sentence form. Just as there is a distinction between concrete statement and statement forms, there is also a distinction between concrete argument and argument forms. A concrete argument is an argument consisting entirely of concrete statements. An argument form is an argument consisting entirely of statement forms. The following are examples of concrete arguments. A1. All Lutherans are Protestants. Some Lutherans are Republicans. Some Protestants are Republicans. A2. All Lutherans are Protestants. Some Protestants are Republicans. Some Lutherans are Republicans. Note, henceforth we shall use / to abbreviate therefore. In order to obtain the argument In order to obtain the argument form associated with A1, we can simply replace each descriptive term by its initial letter. We can do this because the descriptive terms in A1 all have different initial letters. This yields the following argument form. An alternative version of the form using XYZ is given to the right. So on the left, all L are P, some L are L, therefore some P are R. Did I read that correct? I hope I said some L are R. Let's try this again. So all L are P, some L are R, therefore some P are R. That sounds okay, right? It's the same as all X are Y, some X are Z, some Y are Z. By a similar procedure, we can convert concrete arguments into associated argument form. All L are P, some P are R, therefore some L are R. XYZ form. All X are Y, some Y are Z, therefore some X are Z. Observe that argument A2 is obtained from argument A1 simply by interchanging the conclusion and the second premise. In other words, these two arguments, which are different, consist of precisely the same statements. They are different because their conclusions are different. As we will later see, they are different in one that is a valid argument and the other is an invalid argument. Do you know which one is which? In which one does the truth of the premise guarantee the truth of the conclusion? In deriving an argument form from a concrete argument, care must be taken in assigning letters to the descriptive terms. First of all, different letters must be assigned to different terms. We cannot use L for both Lutherans and Protestants. Secondly, we cannot use two different letters for the same term. We cannot use L for Lutherans in one statement and use Z in another statement. Which brings us to number 8. Demonstrating invalidity using the method of counterexamples. Earlier we discussed some of the basic ideas of logic, including the notion of validity and invalidity. In the present section we attempt to get a better idea about these notions. We begin by making precise definitions concerning statement forms and argument forms. A substitution instance of an argument/statement form is a concrete argument statement that is obtained from that form by substituting appropriate descriptive terms for the letters in such a way that each occurrence of the same letter is replaced by the same term. A uniform substitution instance of an argument statement form is a substitution instance with the additional property that distinct letters are replaced by distinct, non-equivalent descriptive terms. In order to understand these definitions, let us look at very simple argument form, since it has just one premise and is not a syllogistic argument form. It says all x are y, therefore some y are z. It's strange. Now consider the following concrete arguments. All cats are dogs, therefore some cats are cows. All cats are dogs, therefore some dogs are cats. All cats are dogs, therefore some dogs are cows. These examples are not chosen because of their intrinsic interest, but merely to illustrate the concepts of substitution instance and uniform substitution instance. First of all, 1, that is, all cats are dogs, therefore some cats are cows, is not a substitution instance of f, which is all x are y, therefore some y are z. And so it is not a uniform substitutions instance either. And then he asks in brackets, why is this? In order for 1 to be a substitution instance to f, it is required that each occurrence of the same letter is replaced by the same term. This is not the case in 1. In the premise, y is replaced by dogs, but in the conclusion, y is replaced by cats. It is accordingly not a substitution instance. Next, the number 2, which is all cats are dogs, therefore some dogs are cats, is a substitution instance of f, but is not a uniform substitution instance. There is only one letter that appears twice or more in f, namely y. In each occurrence it is replaced by the same term, namely dogs. Therefore 2 is a substitution instance of f. On the other hand, 2 is not a uniform substitution instance, since distinct letters, namely x and z, are replaced by the same descriptive term, namely cats. Finally, 3, all cats are dogs, therefore some cats, some dogs are cows, is a uniform substitution instance and hence a substitution instance of f. Y is the only letter that is repeated. In each occurrence, it is replaced by the same term, namely dogs. So 3 is a substitution instance of f. To see whether it is a uniform substitution instance, we check to see that the same description term is not used to replace different letters. The only descriptive term that is repeated is dogs, and in each case it replaces y. Thus, 3 is a uniform substitution instance. The following is an argument form followed by 3 concrete arguments, one of which is not a substitution instance, one of which is a non-uniform substitution instance, and one of which is a uniform substitution instance, in that order. So, f, no x are y, no y are z, therefore no x are z. 1. No cats are dogs, no cats are cows, therefore no dogs are cows. 2. No cats are dogs, no dogs are cats, therefore no cats are cats. And 3. No cats are dogs, no dogs are cows, therefore no cats are cows. Check to make sure you agree with this classification. Having defined uniform substitution instance, we now define the notion of having the same form. 2 arguments, statements, have the same form if and only if they are both uniform substitution instances of the same argument statement form. For example, the following arguments have the same form because they can both be obtained from the argument form that follows as uniform substitution instances. A1. All Lutherans are Republicans. Some Lutherans are Democrats. Therefore, some Republicans are Democrats. A2. All cab drivers are maniacs. Some cab drivers are Democrats. Therefore, some maniacs are Democrats. The common form to A1 and A2 is F. All X are Y. Some X are Z, therefore some Y are Z. As an example of 2 arguments that do not have the same form, consider arguments 2 and 3 above. They cannot be obtained from a common argument form by uniform substitution. Earlier, we gave 2 intuitive definitions of validity. Let us look at them again. An argument is valid if and only if it is impossible for the conclusion to be false while the premises are all true. To say that an argument is valid is to say that if the premises were true, then the conclusion would necessarily also be true. Although these definitions may give us a general idea concerning what valid means in logic, they are difficult to apply to specific instances. It would be nice if we had some methods that could be applied to specific arguments by which to decide whether they are valid or invalid. In the remainder of the present section, we examine a method for showing that an argument is invalid, if it is indeed invalid. The method of counterexamples. Note, however, that this method cannot be used to prove that a valid argument is in fact valid. In order to understand the method of counterexamples, we begin with the following fundamental principle of logic. Whether an argument is valid or invalid is determined entirely by its form. In other words, validity is a function of form. This principle can be rendered somewhat more specific as follows. Fundamental principle of logic. If an argument is valid, then every argument with the same form is also valid. If an argument is invalid, then every argument with the same form is also invalid. There is one more principle that we need to add before describing the method of counterexamples. Since the principle almost doesn't need to be stated, we call it the trivial principle, which is stated in two forms. The trivial principle. No argument with all true premises but a false conclusion is valid. If an argument has all true premises but has a false conclusion, then it is invalid. The trivial principle follows from the definition of validity given earlier. An argument is valid if, and only if, it is impossible for the conclusion to be false while the premises are all true. Now, if the premises are all true and the conclusion is in fact false, then it is possible for the conclusion to be false while the premises are all true. Therefore, if the premises are all true and the conclusion is in fact false, then the argument is not valid, that is, it's invalid. Now let's put all these ideas together. Consider the following concrete argument and the corresponding argument form to its right. Alright, so we got left and right, A and F. A, all cats are mammals, or all X are Y. Some mammals are dogs, some Y are Z, therefore some cats are dogs, therefore some X are Z. First notice, whereas the premise of A First notice that whereas the premises of A are both true, the conclusion is false. Therefore, in virtue of the trivial principle, argument A is invalid. But if A is invalid, then in virtue of the fundamental principle, every argument with the same form is also invalid. In other words, every argument with form F is invalid. For example, the following arguments are invalid. All cats are mammals. Some mammals are pets. Some cats are pets. Therefore, some cats are pets. All Lutherans are Protestants. Some Protestants are Democrats. Therefore, some Lutherans are Democrats. Notice that the premises are both true and the conclusion is true in both arguments A2 and A3. Nevertheless, these arguments are invalid. To say that A2 or A3, those are the two I just read about the cats and mammals, Lutherans and Protestants and Democrats. To say that those is invalid is to say that the truth of the premises does not guarantee the truth of the conclusion. The premises do not support the conclusion. For example, it is possible for the conclusion to be false even while the premises are both true. Can't we imagine a world in which all cats are mammals, some mammals are pets, but no cats are pets? Such a world could in fact be easily brought about by a dastardly dictator who passed an edict prohibiting cats to be kept as pets. In this world, all cats are mammals. That hasn't changed. Some mammals are pets, like dogs, yet no cats are pets, in virtue of the edict proclaimed by the dictator. Thus, in argument A2, it is possible for the conclusion to be false, while the premises are both true, which is to say that A2 is invalid. In demonstrating that a particular argument is invalid, it may be difficult to imagine a world in which the premises are true but the conclusion is false. An easier method, which does not require one to imagine unusual words, is the method of counterexamples, which is based on the following definition and principle, each stated in two forms. A counterexample to an argument form is any substitution instance, not necessarily uniform, of that form having true premises but a false conclusion. That's A. Now B. A counterexample to a concrete argument A is any concrete argument that 1 has the same form as A, 2 has all true premises, and 3 has a false conclusion. Principle of counterexamples. A. An argument form is invalid if it admits a counterexample. B. An argument form is valid only if it does not admit any counterexamples. The principle of counterexamples follows our earlier principles and the definition of the term counterexamples. One might reason as follows. Suppose argument A admits a counterexample, then there is another argument A asterisk such that A asterisk has the same form as A. That's 1. 2. A asterisk has all true premises, and 3. A asterisk has a false conclusion. Since A asterisk has all true premises but a false conclusion, A asterisk is invalid in virtue of the trivial principle. But A and A asterisk have the same form, so in virtue of the fundamental principle, A is invalid also. According to the principle of counterexamples, one can demonstrate that an argument is invalid by showing that it admits a counterexample. As an example, consider the earlier arguments A2 and A3. These are both invalid. To see this, we merely look at the earlier argument A and note that it is a counterexample to both A2 and A3. Specifically, A has the same form as A2 and A3, it has all true premises, and it has a false conclusion. Thus, the existence of A demonstrates that A2 and A3 are invalid. Let us consider two more examples. In each of the following, an invalid argument is given, and a counterexample is given to its right. Alright, so A4. No cats are dogs. No dogs are apes. Therefore, no cats are apes. Counter or C4. No men are women. No women are fathers. Therefore, no men are fathers. A5. All humans are mammals. No humans are reptiles, therefore no mammals are reptiles. Counterexample, all men are humans, no men are mothers, therefore no humans are mothers. In each case, the argument to the right has the same form as the argument to the left. It also has all true premises and a false conclusion. Thus it demonstrates the invalidity of the argument to the left. In A4 and as well as in A5, the premises are true, and so is the conclusion. Nevertheless, the conclusion does not follow from the premises, and so the argument is invalid. For example, if A4 were valid, then C4 would be valid also, since they have exactly the same form. But C4 is not valid because it has a false conclusion and all true premises, so C4 is not valid either. The same applies to A5 and C5. If all we know about an argument is whether its premises and conclusions are true or false, then usually we cannot say whether the argument is valid or invalid. In fact, there is only one case in which we can say, when the premises are all true and the conclusion is false, the argument is definitely invalid. However, in all other cases, we cannot say one way or the other. We need additional information about the form of the argument. This is summarized in the following table. Alright, so how do I put this on air? There's like 3 columns. One is premises, next is conclusion, and then is it valid or invalid? Right, so if the premises are all true, the conclusion is true, then valid or invalid, can't tell, need more info. If the premises are true, the conclusion is false, is it valid or invalid? This is definitely invalid. If the premises are not all true, and the conclusion is true, is it valid or invalid? You can't tell, need more info. If the premises are not all true and the conclusion is false, then is it valid or invalid? Can't tell, need more info. 9 is examples of valid arguments in syllogistic logic. Alright, I guess that's something for next week. Let's see. Put this paste this in the chat in case people want to see this. There's somebody still left in the chat. Del and Dan and Earth Defense Force, Ganja Khan and Grump. Hans Dietrich is also there. Lone Frog and Jane and Leader Deslock, something like that, also there. Tomato Toe is there, and Vincent and Tuanons. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will pick this up next week, I think. So until then, take care, everybody.
Opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific